After the tone, please state your name.
Welcome to today's webinar, Cognitive Beliefs and Cultural Variables Matter in STEM Career Development, presented by Angela Byars-Winston. My name is Greg Nagy, and I am the Virtual Learning Community Manager from The Ohio State University, who provides technical support for the STEM Equity Pipeline Project. Before we start this presentation, I would like to go over some housekeeping items for this webinar. This webinar is scheduled to last roughly 1 hour and is being recorded in order to view this presentation in its entirety later. The recorded webinar will be available in the next few days on the www.stemequitypipeline.org website. As you have already found out, you will be watching the presenter present slides through the live meeting interface while listening to them talk over your phone. If you cannot get the live meeting software to work today, you can follow along using your phone. You can also download today's slides from the homepage of the stemequitypipeline.org website. All the attendees' phones have been automatically muted. The presenter will answer questions after the presentation. However, we can take questions at any time. This is how we take questions. At any time during the presentation and during the Q&A, you may submit a question by clicking on the button labeled Q&A at the top left of your live meeting window. Type in your question and then click the Ask button. The presenter or I will read and respond to these questions at the end of the presentation. You can download today's slides from the handout icon at the top right of your live meeting window also. I would like to start the webinar by introducing Mimi Lufkin, CEO, National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity and STEM Equity Pipeline Project Director. Mimi?
Thank you, Greg. Welcome, everyone. And good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast and morning to those of you west of us. It's my pleasure to be here today with you. At the beginning of every webinar, we do a few little things that help us identify who's on today, how you heard about today, and also to give you a quick overview of the pipeline project. So for those of you who've been on some of our webinars before, I apologize for repeating this, but we may have some new people here today, so I'll do this quickly. First of all, I'm going to post a poll that's going to ask you a series of questions about how is it that you heard about today's webinar. We have a variety of options for you to respond to, and we'd like to know whether or not you got the information from our listserv, from another listserv. And you'll notice, it says Q&A after the questions that if you're willing to let us know which listserv or which conference or what newsletter or which website you heard about the webinar from besides our typical communication vehicles, then if you would just go to the Q&A box and type in that information so we can gather that. We use this information to help us know whether our outreach is effective or not. And I'm going to go ahead and open the results up so that you can see these as they come in. And, well, it's good to know that our listserv obviously is functioning very well and that many of you are hearing about this directly from our communications. But it's also nice to know that colleagues are forwarding the information to you as well. I'll leave that poll open for a little while, so a couple more seconds here. It looks like people are still quickly responding. And it looks like maybe we've got a little bit of a lull in the response, and so I'll go ahead and we'll go back to our PowerPoint slides. I want to just quickly remind you about the STEM Equity Pipeline Project, and I apologize for some reason the bullets in our PowerPoint when we loaded it today into Microsoft Office Live Meeting, they had a mind of their own, so we have some interesting, I don't know what a 10 ball is, never seen that in pool, but anyway, so ignore the funny things on the left. But basically, the STEM Equity Pipeline Project is a project of our foundation, funded by the National Science Foundation out of their Gender and Science and Engineering program there. And we really appreciate NSF's support for the work that we're doing. And the goals of this project are to build the capacity of the formal education community. That means school administrators, counselors, teachers, state departments of education, to provide high-quality professional development on gender equity in STEM. We're working in 11 states. I'll show those to you in just a minute. And we're trying to do this by integrating gender equity professional development into STEM teacher professional development in those states. Connecting the project's work to existing accountability systems, particularly the career and technical education systems, accountability measures for non-traditional training and employment have been very important. and also, of course, broadening the commitment to gender equity in STEM. And we do this by providing professional development. We do teacher training. We provide consulting and technical assistance in the states that we're working in. And, of course, we have this virtual web-based professional learning community, which these webinars are part of that, which we do outreach across the country. So I suspect if I was to ask where you all are from, we might see representatives from all over the nation. We will also be developing a best practices quote-unquote handbook. It'll be an online tool from all the things that we learned from this project during our 5th year, which we are currently in the 4th year of the implementation of this grant. So how can you get involved? Well, if you're from any of the states listed here, California, Georgia, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, Ohio, Oklahoma, New Hampshire, Texas, or Wisconsin, say that fast 5 times, we invite you to participate on your state team and to learn more about what we're doing in those states. You can go to the STEM Equity Pipeline website, that's in the second bullet down there, and find out who the contact is in your state to get involved. But if you're not from one of those states, you certainly can continue to participate in the virtual learning community by checking out all the resources on the website and participating in these webinars and other online trainings that we conduct. So in order to give Angela a little background information about who's on today's webinar, I am going to flip up another poll here for you. You're going to get good at doing these polls. And we want to know who you are so that as she makes comments and we have discussions regarding the presentation that Angela is making, we can make sure that we address the needs of the group that's present in today's webinar. I'm going to go ahead and, as you're responding, show the results so Angela can see these as they appear. And it looks to me like we have, it's a dead heat. A pretty even run of individuals from various backgrounds, administrators, faculty members, student support staff, state agency, and informal groups that are working in STEM. And there's always this other category. And so if you want to tell us who you are, again, if you can go to the Q&A section and let us know if you don't consider yourself one of the 5 categories above, that also helps us as we develop future webinars, because right today we have more of the other people than we do anybody else. So we'd love to hear about who you are so that we can design these for your needs. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and, without further ado, introduce to you our presenter today, Dr. Angela Byars-Winston, who's the Director of Research Initiatives, the School of Medicine and Public Health at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and at the Center for Women's Health Research. Dr. Byars earned her doctorate in counseling psychology from Arizona State University, and her research interests include the examination of cultural influences on career development, especially for racial and ethnic minorities and women, using social cognitive career theory, which we will learn about today. Dr. Byars-Winston's recent work has focused on the career development experiences of underrepresented groups in the sciences, engineering, and medicine. So I'd like to, at this time, pass it on to Dr. Byars.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mimi, and hello to everyone who's joined us. I am very grateful for the opportunity and the honorific invitation to share this hour with you, and I'd like to start with a little bit of an overview of what I hope to achieve with our time together, and then focus a little bit more on some of the research I've been doing. I'd like to share with you a little bit about some culture and cognitive research studies I've done relating to underrepresented racial ethnic minorities in science and engineering majors, talk a little bit about the implications of that work for interventions in terms of what do you do. I am assuming that this is the time that we're preaching to the choir, but even the choir needs to practice sometimes, and so I'm imagining that many of us on the call are actually in direct service with students and looking for strategies that might help us to increase their persistence for those of students who choose to pursue science and engineering. And most of my work will be talking about undergraduate students, although I've worked with graduate and early career professionals as well in science, engineering, and medicine. And then I'd like to make a case for a multicultural focused STEM career awareness approach. and wrap up our time there. So without delaying too far, I will give you the 3 takeaway points up front in case people have to jump off. I can tell from our numbers bouncing around on the attendees section, Mimi, that we have folks who will be in and out, so I'd like to give you my main points up front. The first one, let's see if I did this correctly. There we go. Is that culture and context matter. I am a counseling psychologist by training, as Mimi mentioned, and so my background is really focusing on the role of the mind and self-perceptions in human behavior and emotions. And what we know from a very large body of research is that people's perception of their cultural group memberships, be it gender, race, ethnicity, social class, ability, status, sexual orientation, etc., influence how they perceive themselves in the world and how they believe other people perceive them. And it also interacts with the context that people are in, the places that people live and work and learn, afford different supports or different challenges in terms of any behavior that a person wants to pursue. So relative to career choice, in terms of my area of emphasis, which is why and how people choose work, I've been interested in how these self-perceptions about work, like what am I good at, what are the careers that I might be interested in, how those self-perceptions form at the same time that I'm forming an identity about my own cultural group, understanding who I am. In this case, you've seen my picture, so you might imagine from my phenotype that I'm an African-American woman, and those perceptions of my cultural group memberships, in this case, gender and race, influence and interact with my perceptions about what work should I do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Let's see. And point number 2 is, as a researcher by training, I'm really interested in a research approach to understanding the influence of culture and context relative to people's cognitive beliefs about what they think they can do. And I'm talking about what I call the 3 C's as key factors in STEM career development. The third point is that that says intentions, but the word should be interventions, would do well to promote a multicultural STEM-focused career development approach in any intervention. I'm going to argue in this time that we have together that much of our discourse around retention and increasing persistence for underrepresented students in STEM has not focused on the cultural piece, and so that's the focus I want to emphasize with our time today. So why culture? There are 3 changes in demographic concentration in this country that have shifted who we are in terms of the workforce as well as the overall population. And these 3 demographic shifts have been neatly termed by some of my colleagues, Gerald Wing Sue and his colleagues, the graying, the feminization, and the browning of the U.S. population. Now, this isn't new, but I think what is interesting is for us to think about what are the implications for STEM careers in addressing the demographic shifts in this country. We know that almost a third of the U.S. workforce in the next couple of years would be comprised of people who are 50 and older, which doesn't seem that far away anymore as it used to feel for me. We know that many people who are at retirement age will plan to continue to work either because they have to or because they choose to. Women and racial ethnic minorities in the last couple of years and in the next couple of years to come will account for a large segment of the labor force growth in terms of who will be the new labor market entrants compared to white ethnic groups. And so we know that the new workforce will largely be comprised of women, of ethnic minorities, and of older individuals. And so given that we have this gap in terms of STEM workers who can occupy the jobs that are growing and expanding in the STEM workforce, traditionally underrepresented groups become one focus to address the STEM shortage. And this has been, out of all the topics I guess I could choose in terms of cultural factors, I choose to focus on the Browning factor, that is specifically racial ethnic minorities and their pursuit of STEM careers, really trying to answer the question, why so few, but then flipping the question on its head to ask, for those who are pursuing STEM careers, what helps to contribute to their persistence? We know that one of the answers to the questions of why so few is not that there's a lack of interest or that there's a lack of ability. We know that capable students leave science. Some of the work from Seymour and Hewitt, Elaine Seymour and her colleague Nancy Hewitt, who wrote a book a couple of years ago called Talking About Leaving, has found that women and underrepresented racial ethnic minority students leave STEM fields in spite of earning good grades. So it's not just about their competence or lack thereof. And this slide that's in front of you shows data from the Higher Education Research Institute, which is out of UCLA, and annually they spend data that's provided by the National Science Foundation that's national based on freshman intentions to pursue different majors. And this one is specifically for science and engineering, and what you'll see, if I could use my little arrow here, is that relative to white ethnic groups on the top line here, that racial ethnic minorities, specifically African Americans, people of Latino descent, American Indians, and Alaska Natives, have similar, if not higher, intentions to pursue science and engineering majors compared to white ethnic peers, especially when you look at biological sciences and agricultural life sciences. So we know that it's not that people are not interested. And so the question for me then becomes, what might account for some of the differences we see in actual persistence? This next slide actually shows from another national data set out of the University of Oklahoma that Rosemary Hayes provides, is that into the second year, many racial ethnic minority students and white ethnic students who start off as freshmen in STEM majors have similar persistence rates into their second year. What we start to see is a disparity once they get into the sixth year degree completion rate. It's about a 12% difference. And my research question is really trying to understand, why is that the case? Now, I do want to make a note here as I move into my research focus, and that is, I find it interesting that in much of our STEM discourse, we tend to focus on what I call the effects of culture, that is, differences in completion rates by race or by gender or by ability status, such as the slide I have in front of you. But we don't actually examine statistically cultural forms of experience to understand those disparities. That is, we talk about differences in terms of cultural groups, but we don't actually statistically examine what cultural variables account for those differences. A simple way to put it relative to black career development within STEM is that we tend to study STEM pursuits for black students apart from what it means to be black. And when I think about my own experience in certainly pursuing science and then graduate advanced degrees, certainly my conception of myself as a cultural being came into play and affected my sense of fit, my sense of comfort with the field, my sense of acceptance with other peers as well as faculty. And so as I shift now to a research focus that's really organizing my studies, what I've been interested in is work by Albert Bandura, who is a prominent psychologist, retired emeritus from Stanford University, who advanced the concept of self-efficacy. And my hunch is if we had an opportunity to put a poll up, Mimi, and ask people by indicating yes or no, have they heard of this term, many people would say yes. Self-efficacy is a very fancy term that just simply means people's confidence in their ability to do something. And Albert Bandura, in advancing this concept of self-efficacy, argued that people's level of motivation, their feelings or their affective states, and their actions are based more on what they believe they can do than what is objectively the case. And research has borne this out for decades that if we take a traditional indicator like GRE or GPA or SAT score or ACT score and try to predict performance from a freshman student for their sophomore year or their junior year performance, what we'll see is that a self-efficacy variable will account for just as much, if not more, variance of what explains that future persistence or that future performance than this quote-unquote objective indicator of academic ability. And so Albert Bandura has advanced what he calls social cognitive theory, a fancy way to basically say that the beliefs I have about what I think I can do are informed by my interactions with others. I have 2 children, and I look at how the 10-month-old is learning about her world and what she's good at, and part of it is what she's hearing from myself and my husband and her sister telling her what she's good at. Every time that she could put a Cheerio in her mouth by herself and use her pincher grasp, we're clapping for her, and you could just see her self-efficacy for self-feeding going up. So Bandura, that's kind of a crude example to kind of illustrate that. Bandura argues the way that we become and know what we're good at in terms of our confidence levels is by these social interactions, both direct with our environment and indirect in terms of observations with other people. So if you could hold on for a few more slides, I just want to give us a little orientation to Bandura's work applied to career development using the theory of social cognitive career theory, and then I'll talk about how I've applied that to my work and then the so what of how it is relevant to our interest in pursuing and promoting STEM careers for underrepresented groups. The model that you have in front of you was developed about 15 or 16 years ago by Bob Lent, Steve Brown, and Gail Hackett. And Gail Hackett was my advisor at Arizona State University. And so their focus is really to take this concept from Albert Bandura, which is people's confidence in their ability that they could do something well, in this case self-efficacy belief, which asks the question, can I do this? And expand that to another variable, which is outcome expectations. This is the construct that gets at, do I think it's worthwhile to pursue a task? Think about the work that each one of us is doing now. Whatever career or work you find yourself doing, consider how it is that you came to choose this particular position as well as this career. For many of us, it was being at the right place at the right time. Perhaps you were working on another degree or in another area like accounting. That was my first college major. And an experience happened that caused it not to work out, and somebody encouraged you to consider another option. Gee, Angela, you know, you're really good at listening to people. Have you thought about psychology as a major? And that was one of the cases for me. My minor then became my major, and as I got into the field and got into the degree in the psych department at San Diego State University, I had more experiences that affirmed that, gee, I might be good at this area, and perhaps I actually could make a living at this. I did not leave my undergraduate degree wanting to be a PhD or pursuing a profession as a faculty member. That didn't happen until I finished my master's degree, and I thought, if I scratched my head the spring semester before it was time to graduate, and everybody's thinking about what are they going to do next, I thought, well, I guess I'll just keep going to school and get a degree and a PhD. And before I knew it, I was encouraged to take this up as a full-time kind of pursuit in terms of doing research. So think about all those factors that shape what you do. It's a combination from this theory's perspective of self-efficacy, the little red engine that could factor. I think I can, I think I can. And then outcome expectations, that it's worth it. I won't spend too much time on the rest of the model, but going from the left to the right, the theory argues that all of us have individual factors, these person inputs, predispositions, cultural influences, and background experiences like family support or family expectations that combine to inform these learning experiences that then become the bedrock that inform our efficacy beliefs and our outcome expectations. And on the right side of the model, these two variables combine to inform what we like in terms of interest, our goals in terms of choice and consideration of different pursuits, and our actual actions, what we actually end up choosing and doing for career or degree completion. The upper right-hand side really focuses on these contextual factors, that is, the perceptions of the environment in terms of supports and barriers that I may encounter as I pursue a given task. So that's a lot to say, and I just kind of want to re-summarize this theory in a quick way as we go into the data itself. And that is going back to the 3 C's that I mentioned before as one of the main points to understand in terms of promoting academic and career development for underrepresented groups. These cultural factors, which are on the left side of the model, these cognitive factors, which are in the middle, the self-beliefs about what I think I can do and do I think something is worthwhile. And then the far right side, these contextual factors in terms of perceptions of support and barriers. To summarize the 3 C's, this is actually published in an article that I wrote last year, which you have the full citation for at the end of your this PowerPoint if you want to retrieve it. And that just kind of describes some of the indicators of contextual, cognitive, and cultural factors. As I mentioned before, contextual factors really get at perceptions in the environment, which has been a critical part in the STEM literature. What types of interactions do underrepresented students have with faculty, with their peers? How do they perceive the campus climate both inside the classroom as well as outside of the classroom? Relative to the cognitive factors, asking the question, can I be successful, or how confident am I to be successful and cope with challenges in pursuing a STEM major? And do I believe that this major is worthwhile? Does it benefit me in some way? Do I feel like it fits my values? The cultural factors is the piece, as I mentioned before, that I think has been missing. Although we talk about culture within the STEM persistence discourse, we have not seen much research that actually analyzes these factors as a variable. And I just want to highlight 2 indicators of cultural factors that I've been looking at. And this is certainly not exhaustive. It's just that as a researcher, I have to choose a few things that I can study out of all the cultural variables. And I've chosen to look at 2. One is the salience of culture in terms of students' confidence and comfort with their own ethnic identity, how comfortable they are with being a Latino, or in our case in Wisconsin, we have a large group of Hmong or Southeast Asian students, as well as African American, Native American students. And then also, the second variable is their comfort interacting with others outside of their own racial ethnic group. Now, when you think about the fact that many of these students are numerically underrepresented in the major, certainly the ability to interact with other people outside your own group in a comfortable and competent way is a necessity for survival, especially in engineering, where many of their academics are based on small group discussions, small group projects, etc. So keep this in mind as we go forward to the next couple of slides. So just to summarize, there are 2 main questions guiding my research, and that is specifically, what is the relevance of culture on students' academic and career cognitions and their choice behavior? And then secondly, relative to STEM specifically, is what is the relevance of cultural identity, again, going back to those 2 variables in the previous slide, given that students are in a minority status and they often experience a restricted opportunity structure, that is, they may not be mentored as well, they may not have as many opportunities to get involved in student research. We heard some, and I'll talk about this in my qualitative study a little bit later, some students who talk about not being integrated well with their peers, sitting down in a row in a classroom and then having the entire row clear because they're racial ethnic minority and feeling left out, if you could imagine what that might feel like for an 18, 19, 20-year-old student, and then they're supposed to spend the next 50 minutes focusing on what the lecturer is teaching them, and they just felt like they were, this outcast person in the classroom. How did those variables influence and interact with their academic and career choice behavior? So let's look a little bit at 3 studies, and I'm going to highlight a few things as quickly as possible so that we have some time for some discussion, hopefully at the end. So I think I'm doing okay on time, Mimi.
Yep, you're doing great.
7:32 here. So what have I found? I want to highlight 3 studies, 2 quantitative and then 1 qualitative study, and then talk about the implications of these data. This study was conducted here in Wisconsin with about 240, I think 220 underrepresented minorities, Southeast Asian students, which were comprised of Hmong, Laotian, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Native American students, Latinos, and African American Black students. And I use both of those terms because some of our students are first or second generation students from African countries. Someone to acknowledge that. And they're in 2 different colleges, engineering and biological life sciences, agricultural life sciences, with most of them being biological majors. And this study is published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology, which again has a full reference at the end of this PowerPoint in case you're interested. So I'm going to highlight a few take-home points using these orange squares, and then I want to give you a sample of how we looked at the same study in a historically Black college. So this is at a predominantly white institution, hence the term up top, the PWI is referring to predominantly white institution. And we used the multiple groups analysis, which for those of you who were traumatized in statistics, please don't leave the conversation. I'll make this real simple for you, for all of us. But this basically allows me to look at the entire social cognitive theory model, just to kind of scroll back there, using all of these variables, and simultaneously examine how did they correlate with each other. So going back to this analysis, this allowed me to look at the role of cultural factors on the left side, and again, we were looking at ethnic identity as well as other group orientation being this comfort with other people outside of my own ethnic group. And we looked at how that interacted with their perceptions of campus climate as an indicator of context. And in the middle here, the combination of academic self-efficacy and outcome expectations represents the cognitive factors. So we looked at context, culture, and cognitions relative to students' interest and their goals to complete a STEM degree. Now again, this is a sample of a couple hundred students who are already in STEM majors. They were pretty evenly distributed across freshman and through senior years. And what we found was that ethnic identity did not significantly correlate with anything in this particular model. That is, their comfort with their own skin and their own ethnic heritage was not a significant factor, but what came out was their comfort with other people outside of their ethnic group. And we were looking at this in my research team as an indicator of bicultural competence, this ability and this facility to move and interact with different people outside of my own group. And interestingly, that significantly correlated with their confidence to complete a STEM degree, academic self-efficacy. So said another way, their comfort with people outside their own ethnic group was positively associated with feeling confident that they could complete a STEM degree. Now that makes sense to us when you think about students who are underrepresented dealing with their onlyness status in a predominantly white institution. It certainly helps if you're able to work well and feel comfortable in working well with others outside of your own group. And I want to highlight the fact that what seems to be driving the model of interest to goals in particular is that confidence in their ability to complete a STEM degree increases, or I should say is positively associated with their interest in STEM activities. And for engineering students, that was significantly correlated with their intention to complete a STEM degree. For biology students, in this box here, academic self-efficacy directly related to goals. That is, for biology majors or life science majors, the more confident the students were in their ability to complete a STEM degree, the more likely they were to have high intentions to complete that degree. We took that same study, that same model, and applied it last year at a historically Black college, Virginia State University, that has a very large STEM infrastructure, a huge NSF-funded school of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we wanted to say, gosh, if you take this same model and apply it to students who are at a culturally relatively homogeneous environment like a historically Black college, what do you see in terms of similar or different relations? pretty much the same relationships on the right side of the model. What was different is that at a predominantly black college, other group orientation didn't play a role, which makes sense because most of the students look like the ones who are enrolled there. They're, as I said, a culturally homogeneous environment. But ethnic identity played a role here. That is, their comfort and pride in being an African-American student was positively associated with the fact that they believe it's worthwhile, outcome expectations, to complete a STEM degree. Things like, I want to be a STEM major or pursue a STEM career because I will have respect from people in my community. I will be a positive role model for the people who look like me. My parents will be proud of me. I will, kind of be a credit to the race, so to speak, by getting one of these quote-unquote hard degrees and pursuing a STEM career. Now, we find that very interesting. I tell you why specifically, because this is the first study that has really looked at, as I said, statistically, trying to account for what difference does difference make in STEM career pursuits. We talk about race, we talk about gender, other forms of culture, but statistically really trying to capture where and how does culture make a difference has been elusive for researchers. And so this is the first study that's really found a specific relationship between ethnic identity and other group orientation relative to STEM career pursuits for underrepresented students. We use this term ALANA, and I should have mentioned it earlier, so I apologize, but this is just an acronym for African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and in our case, Southeast Asians, and Native Americans. So underrepresented students who are in STEM have interests that are correlated with their academic confidence and outcome expectations. So when we're looking at interventions to promote STEM careers, based on the model here, if I go back, efficacy, get my little pointer here, efficacy and outcome expectations are critical in driving students' interests, and that was for both models here, for whether it's a historically black college or a predominantly white institution. So it's important as we think about building students' interest to build their confidence and their perceptions that pursuing this degree is worthwhile. Why did you come here in the first place? Why did you want to pursue a STEM career in the first place? And then their goals are also related to academic confidence, outcome expectations, and interests. So there's some unique findings here as we talk about implications, and specifically at a predominantly white institution, is that it's important to promote and address students' comfort with ethnically different people, other group orientation, OGO, because that was positively associated with their being academically confident and perceiving a positive campus climate. For those of us who might be on the call who are working in more homogeneous environments, at least based on one sample from my study, at historically black colleges, that their cultural pride or their comfort with themselves as a cultural being is strongly connected to their beliefs that pursuing a STEM degree is worthwhile, often because it's connected to their sense of being a good cultural group member, that is, being a credit to the race. So there's some implications that I talk about in a more extended way in another article here that is in the Journal of Career Development, where I take this construct of cultural identity and really apply it in a more extended way to STEM careers pursuits. And looking at the fact, I just want to highlight this last bullet here, that cultural identity and variables relating to cultural group membership may actually facilitate how students appraise or make sense of and negotiate the cultural context of education and work. It may help them buffer the effects of dealing with the racial stigma of being a lonely only is my verb or my term in STEM. It may help them bridge and form interethnic supports with other students outside of their own ethnic group. And it may also help them to bond in terms of being more strongly affiliated with in-group members like the National Society for Black Engineers or the Hispanic Society for Professional Engineering. I think I'm going to just highlight a few points from this next study. This is a qualitative study that we did also here at the UW with 26 students. You can see their ethnic breakdown there in front of you. And what we're specifically looking at is more of a phenomenological understanding of how these students who are also in engineering, also in life science, were experiencing persistence. What do they say contributed to their own commitment to an intention to complete a STEM degree. And what we found that was very interesting, I just want to highlight a few things that are unique, I think, to this study, and that is that most of our students who were persisting in a STEM degree acknowledged, you know what, challenges are unavoidable. It's different than it was in high school where I could study for, 4 or 5 hours for the whole week and still be on the honor roll. I have to step up my game now that I'm in college. But they had what Amado Padilla and his colleagues called an expectational stance. They had this sense of bring it on. It's going to be hard. I know it's going to be difficult, but it's worthwhile, and I'm going to decide ahead of time in the second bullet that it's worthwhile to face these challenges because I know why I'm here. So they had a very strong, high intrinsic goal commitment. That is, I want to be a good scientist. I want to be a good engineer. I'm committed to this field. They also, I think this next bullet was not unique to our study, but I want to highlight it because they also took on what we called ownership of their degree. They had this informed consumer approach where it's like, no matter whether I'm getting bad advising in terms of how many courses to take or the sequence to take them in, I'm going to make sure that I get the information I need. I'll give you one quick example. One student who went to a National Society for Black Engineering student meeting, a NSBE meeting, met one of the guest speakers who was from a firm in Washington, D.C. She immediately connected with the person, kept his card, and once she got back to her, classes in her semester and the person had gone back to D.C., she stayed in touch with this person and actually went so far as to send him some of her assignments and project write-ups just to get his perspective in terms of her final reports that she would submit in for her grades and for her courses, and actually went so far as actually to create her own internship with this relationship that she had cultivated on her own. And so these are kind of examples of people who just decided, come hell or high water, I'm going to make this work for me. The second bullet highlights that many of our students acknowledge that they've found a way to fuel their own fire, to affirm their own selves, and sought out people who could help encourage them and nurture them regardless of cultural fit. They did not emphasize themselves as the other all the time in terms of I'm always aware of my onlyness status, but they focus a lot on how could I get what I need from the environment and make the environment support me. These next two slides just give you a few quotes to give you a feel of some of our students. We were just so impressed with them. And by the way, we interviewed each of these students 3 different times over the course of 1 year. So we got to get them across an entire academic year in terms of their reflections and their experiences. So here are just a couple of examples. I'll be one of only 2 minorities. I feel kind of uncomfortable, but things haven't really bothered me because I'm just here to learn. So you hear a little bit of this outcome expectation. I'm here because I want to get the degree. I'm here to learn. Another person said, I don't really experience much prejudice or racism here. Like, I know I've heard stories at the wazoo about people being called names and stuff like that, just walking down the street. I haven't experienced stuff like that, I guess, because I know what I want, and I kind of stick my head to it again, goal orientation. I guess if someone would say something like that, I wouldn't pay attention to it. So again, not ignoring that they realize that they're an underrepresented group, but not emphasizing it either, keeping their eye on the prize, so to speak. A few more quotes, and then we'll talk about implications. I'd like to consider myself a minority, but I don't consider myself disadvantaged in any way. I think it's a perfect quote that really exemplifies that I have a consciousness of my onlyness status, but I'm not seeing that as a deficit. In the summer programs with the name of the student support program and stuff, they say things like not just towards a race, but people in general, like bad things can happen. Watch out for this, watch out for that, and this and that. But they never say anything that people go around just saying hi, like in the first few days. They never said anything about people being nice in that way or just being open. This quote really stood out to me in my research team because it really highlighted the fact that I think for many of our interventions and especially the summer support programs, we make an effort to try and inoculate and protect students from what might be the big bad campus that's going to eat them up. But many students are saying, gosh, you know, it's actually not that hostile. And so I think it also just reminds us in our interventions to have a balance of information that we share for students. And I think this is going to bring us home to the implications of, on these last few slides. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to just focus now on what are the implications for interventions as we focus on how to promote STEM career pursuits for underrepresented students. And I think based on these studies, it's important for our interventions to address both students' their beliefs about their academic ability, that is, their self-efficacy beliefs, and their academic expectations, as a way to focus on how to build those up. How do we sustain academic self-efficacy beliefs? And the social cognitive career theory model really focuses our attention to that learning experiences box. And I'll just kind of go back to that for a quick example. Going back to this box here, well, I can't make it turn around, but if it were facing down, this learning experiences box is basically made up of 4 different factors, and I'll just highlight 2 of them in particular that help to shape what we think we're good at. Our actual success experiences, or what are called performance accomplishments. This idea that one success in the current present is likely to beget future successes later on. And so the more that we can help students internalize and own the success experiences they have and not attribute them to external forces, the more likely it is to positively build their efficacy beliefs and outcome expectations. And again, Mimi and the STEM Equity Pipeline in their root causes have talked about that attribution theory role, and this is one of those places where it really makes a difference, is that if people internalize and own their successes, they're more likely to translate that good feeling of success into higher efficacy beliefs. Another one is vicarious learning, this idea that I can observe other people who I relate to doing well, and I feel like if they can do it, I can too. And then thirdly is social or verbal persuasion, encouraging students and telling them that they can do well. And interestingly, a couple of studies that exist with black students in their math science pursuits have found that verbal encouragement from other people like academic advisors, career counselors, faculty, teachers, instructors, significantly associated with their confidence that they could be successful in math courses in college. So something about another person telling you they believe in you and that you're good at something can build those efficacy beliefs. Okay, so back to our implications. It's also important to discuss and have students identify bounce-back plans. We actually developed a mentoring program for the College of Engineering here at the UW-Madison that has been permanently adopted based on this study, which was funded by the Sloan Foundation. I forgot to mention that earlier. I apologize. And we specifically have faculty talk with their mentoring groups, who are all racial ethnic minorities, about their failures in their STEM majors. When you think about a faculty member here in the College of Engineering, just giving that as an example, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, you don't think about them failing organic chem the first time. But guess what? Many of them did. They didn't pass, Algebra 2 the first time. But you look at, a successful professor with a PhD, you might be tenured, and students aren't thinking, gosh, they've ever struggled. And frankly, many of the faculty forgot that they had struggled too. So it's important for some of the mentoring interventions and ways that we're working with students to actually unpack the challenges and then come back and help them identify what we're calling bounce-back plans, strategies for coping with the challenges, not trying to just avoid them, because every challenge is not to be avoided. If we're frank, and this is the psychologist in me, some challenges help you grow. And if we try to sanitize everybody's environment so they never have a failure, they're never going to learn. So it's not about avoiding every failure, but learning how to recover from them. Okay, so I've said enough about that. I sound like a mom. Let's see. So this other piece under the efficacy, building their students' perceptions of their academic ability and academic expectations, is to use those sources of efficacy that I talked about before and the learning experiences to bolster students' confidence in their academic ability and their ability to cope well with challenges in pursuing a STEM degree. And then I think, again, this last take-home bullet here, before I bring it home with a few more slides, is this idea that we really, in our interventions, have got to explicitly address students' experiences with and negotiation of themselves as cultural beings. And I'm going to give some examples of what that might look like. So I'm going to skip this slide because it's just reinforcing the fact that culture influences how we address our interventions. And again, I'm a career development professional at heart, and so I'm really focused on how we recognize that culture is connected to career development. I want to give a quick example of a student that is basically a composite student as a way to bring this home. That was published in a journal article last year, if you're interested, and I unpacked this a little bit more, who represents a composite of experiences that I've actually dealt with here at the UW. And it might look familiar to you, and I want to use this as an example of how to address culture within STEM interventions. So, again, if we had a poll, I would ask you to raise your hand if the scenario sounds familiar once you read it. Renee, who's a sophomore, is thinking seriously about leaving her engineering major. She came to her university, which is predominantly white, because she was aggressively recruited, but she often goes through the whole day without seeing another black student, and she's usually the only black person in her classes where she does not feel at ease to voice her own opinions, especially in her study groups where she feels like her intellectual capacity is always in question. She reports feeling tired of the hassle of justifying my existence in response to other stereotypes about her presumed academic weakness. Although she wants to switch out of engineering, she really likes the field. And she also feels that if she switched majors, she would let people down, as well as herself, and confirm others' belief that she's incapable of earning an engineering degree. So again, if we had a poll, I would ask you if that sounds familiar. I would imagine that most of us have had that kind of student or some factors that touch on that scenario at some point. One of the questions I would think about in terms of how would we use the 3 C's from the social cognitive approach to address Renee is thinking about how she developed her efficacy belief. How did she figure out and come to feel like she could pursue a STEM degree in the first place, and helping her understand how experiences might be eroding her efficacy beliefs artificially, not because she's not good at it, but because she's literally being worn down, if you will, by the unaffirming cultural context. I think this really gets into that second bullet about where and how the perceptions of supports and barriers can deflate students' perceptions that they fit. Our colleague, Mimi, and I were on a panel last week, and one of our colleagues who was on the panel too talked about Jay Martin, who's a professor of engineering here at the UW, talked about how many students have an erroneous interpretation of one failure experience. They have something that goes wrong in a STEM class, like a bad grade or a study group doesn't work out, and they take that as evidence, quote unquote, that they don't belong there. And so as we look at the social cognitive approach and addressing these 3 C's, you can see how context and culture interface to affect people's belief about their confidence in pursuing a degree. And again, in Renee's case, we hear that it's not that she doesn't like the major. She's tired of dealing with the hassle of her onlyness status and proving her existence. You can see threads of stereotype thread here that I might prove that I don't belong or that people like me are incompetent. You also have this pressure, it sounds like, at the end of her scenario where she's concerned about letting people down, that she wants to be a credit to the race. You know, if I'm one of the few people who, you know, look like me who are pursuing these degrees, and many of the students that we actually surveyed in our qualitative study talk about how they have to deal with the exceptionality of status, people's constant awe that they're an underrepresented student in STEM, and what that feels like to always have people go, oh, really? You're an engineer? Oh, that's amazing. Like this exceptionality ideology that somehow they're unique and special, which can be a compliment, but for many people, it actually becomes kind of ironic. Why would I be so surprised that, you know, an African American or a Hmong student would be in engineering? So as we wrap this up, and I'll leave a few of the slides for you to look at on your own. I think there are about 3 or 4 more to go that are self-explanatory. But I want to just highlight a few ways to think about some strategies for directly addressing culture, and I think that takes us right up to the noon hour, Central Standard Time anyway. And I want to highlight these last couple of bullets in terms of recognizing how culture is connected to STEM career development, selecting culturally appropriate strategies, and facilitating cultural competence. My colleague, Ollie Taylor, who's a retired academic in Decatur, Illinois, actually has a cultural assimilation for career success class that she teaches many of her black students. And in that class, she actually goes through teaching them about actual aspects of white culture in terms of interaction styles, communication styles. She teaches them history in terms of understanding not just black history, but its interface with the larger United States in order to understand black-white dynamics that might influence how they are feeling in their academics in terms of feelings of acceptance and onlyness. She addresses directly stereotype threat, teaching them what it is, how it works, and then how to handle the stereotype in study groups. What do you say? When do you say it? She also talks about issues around mainstream culture versus African-American culture. So she spends a lot of time giving students opportunities to build their cultural competence ahead of time so that as they move through STEM, as they move through their degrees into careers, they actually have a consciousness of themselves as a cultural being and skills and tools to interact more effectively across different groups. So I think at that point we are now at noon, and I want to acknowledge that on this last slide here are some references, the full citations of papers I've mentioned throughout. I also want to draw your attention to Rich Feller's website, stemcareer.com. Here he has an incredible wealth of resources that focus specifically on parents, educators, and students themselves who are interested in STEM, resources, videos that you might find useful. Some of my work is on that website too. It's free. It's actually sponsored by NASA, the National Aeronautics Space Administration, and available for you to use. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. I know that Mimi's going to help us facilitate some conversation after this time ends for those of us who want to stay longer. But thank you for your attention, and I look forward to being in touch. Contact me if you're interested in any of these papers. Thank you.
Angela, that was fantastic. This is an area of interest that we've had for a long time, and one that we feel is often overlooked in this conversation about women's access to non-traditional fields, especially STEM areas, and the issue of the intersection of gender and culture for us is a really complex question, and I think you've done an exceptional job of creating a framework that I think really works nicely in terms of all of the research that we looked at. I appreciated your reference to the research literature review that we've put together that talks about a lot of things, but attribution theory being one of them, stereotype threats, et cetera, that plays into the model that you were talking about. I think it's really some interesting things to learn. So there are a few questions that are popping up here, so let me ask some of you and see how this goes. And let me remind everyone who's going to hang in with us, we're going to spend another 10 minutes or so doing a little Q&A, so if you want to hang in with us on that, that would be great. If you have a question, if you could pop it up on the Q&A template, just go to Q&A at the top of your screen and enter your question, and I'll go ahead and facilitate the asking of those with Angela. Let's see, it's hard because I haven't read these yet, so I'll have to just ask
Okay. Can I see that? If I hit the Q&A? Okay, there it is.
Yeah, you probably can. So let's start maybe with Stan's question. It says, has there been any work done to correlate the surprise, quote-unquote, at studying STEM fields to our national lack of academic performance in those areas? In other words, could people be reacting in that way to hearing what major you are because they themselves have a weak background in that area and are reacting to that rather than their impressions of stereotypes? Or do you think it's a mixture of both? Or all of the above?
That's a great question, Stan, and my hunch is, and sounds like a cop-out, but I'm imagining it's a combination of all of those factors as you mentioned before. And it's not to discount the fact that for many of us, we all kind of reify and glorify and put on pedestals folk who are in STEM. And it was interesting, and Mimi can attest to this, last week, as I mentioned, this panel that we were on with Jay Martin, the professor in engineering, he was saying, you don't have to be really good at math to be an engineer. And we all went, oh, it was like heresy because we all have this image of, really super uber smart people who are engineers, and it takes a special kind of, exceptional ability to do physical science or life science, et cetera. And so I do believe that some of the surprise or exceptional image we have of people who are especially underrepresented is fueled by that status or that pedestalized approach that we have to people in STEM. I made a comment more from what is the impact on the individual who is already experiencing the onlyness status, to then have this additional comment of what I call mock shock, hands on both sides of your cheek with your mouth wide open. Oh, wow, that's so great, Angela, that you're doing, so it feeds more into my onlyness status, and I'm even more unique, almost like a dodo bird that's been found in 2011. They still make you? Wow, kind of factor. So I don't discount the fact that there are multiple factors that play into the general public's kind of approach to viewing people in STEM as exceptional. I was more focused on my comment of what's the impact on the individual that compounds, that comment compounds their sense of onlyness even further.
Since we got two of these questions that I think are both related, it's just a resource question from both Paula and Lynn about the name of the professor and at what college. I think it was Decatur, but I'm not sure where she's teaching. There's someone you mentioned that's teaching a class.
Oh, her name is, can I type up, let me see if I can do a little box. I'm going to try to actually do a text box, see if I can make this work. Okay. Her name is,
oh, good. So it's appearing on your screen on the thank you, the end with the thank you slide. All right. You still there, Angela? I think she just set the phone down while she's typing this up, so at least I hope she didn't hang up. Well, if everyone will be patient for just a minute, we'll get Angela back on the phone. I think maybe when she set her phone down to type the information on the screen, she accidentally disconnected her phone. So let's see, I saw that there were some Q&As related to some of the comments that I made about our project, and I can answer a few of these things. There was a question about a copy of the PowerPoint slides. If you would like to get copies of the PowerPoint slides, you can get them in two different ways. One way is by going to the top of the screen, the live meeting screen, and you'll see that there's an icon on the right-hand side that when you place the cursor over it, it says handouts. It looks like three pieces of paper laying one on top of the other. If you click on that, you can actually download a PDF version of the slides, which include all of the notes information for you as well. Another way to get the PowerPoint is it will be posted on the STEM Equity Pipeline site once the webinar is over, along with a link to the archives version of this webinar. You can access it there as well. There was a question about, I mentioned something about becoming involved in the project and contacting a representative on our state, and the question was, what are examples of ways that one can become involved with this? There are a variety of things that we do with the states that we're working with. Depending on which state the action that's going on is a little bit different, but you can access some of the projects by contacting the state contact that's listed there. We also have a facilitator for each state that's on our staff. If you want to contact them, they're also a good person to contact to find out more about what's going on in the state. But there are things like the pilot sites that we're operating. We do trainings in the state, in addition to these kinds of national outreach activities. Angela, are you back?
I'm back.
Yay.
Oh, my goodness, I'm so sorry.
That's okay, you know. Sometimes those things happen. That's okay. I answered a couple of questions that were related to some of the things that I said. So,
oh, I don't know where I left off, where you stopped hearing me, but maybe we should just take another question. I was on the slide that's in front of us, but I don't want to interrupt what you started, Mimi.
Oh, no, I was just finished. Actually, you left us when you were typing Ollie Taylor's name on the thank you slide. If there's
okay. I'm so glad you said something. Boy, I gave you the key to life in those last 5 minutes. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no.
The keys to life that everybody wanted to know. Okay, so I'm back. I mentioned before, kind of transitioning from Ollie Taylor, that she had presented at a 2011 Careers Conference. I don't know if that part was heard. And that if you just mention her talk, which was titled Cultural Assimilation for Career Success, that she could direct you to her handout. I also was making the link back to this slide that's in front of us, that this addresses many of the strategies for implications based on my research that my research team and I are now working to develop to figure out if we help students directly address some of the root causes that Mimi's mentioned and the STEM equity pipeline, like telling students about implicit bias, telling students about stereotype threat, helping them understand how women and underrepresented minority groups are likely to misattribute their successes to external factors, not internalize them and own them, helping them understand that success is supported by practice, effort, and it's not just having the it factor, what I call the Hollywood approach to STEM career development or STEM talent development. You just look for the person who has it. We don't know what it is, but you can tell if they have it. But if you tell students these factors explicitly, there is some evidence relating to at least the stereotype threat and the fixed versus growth mindset that shows if you tell students these factors, when they experience what could be negative interactions around those dynamics, it tends to be less impactful. So that's one of the strategies, is helping students to just understand what the stereotypes are and being upfront about that.
Now, the research that you mentioned, of course, is all working with undergraduate students at the college level. Would you say that everything that you've said so far applies to students in secondary, middle school programs, since that's some of our audiences of that teach students at that level?
Yeah. I actually only have the anecdotal evidence because I've done a lot of work with middle school students. I'm a part of a national network called Expanding Your Horizons. The Madison chapter has been around for 50 years, where we bring about 400 girls from 7th and 8th grade onto the Madison campus for a day, kind of like that Welcome to STEM. Here's a whole orientation with same-gender role models to help encourage and build their interest in STEM. And so my experience anecdotally is from 10 years of doing that work, and a lot of these factors are the same topics we talk about developmentally expressed for them, and they get it. We know that girls are, and I'm specifically speaking about girls, I'm not saying this is not relevant for men, but I only have my anecdotal experience with girls. They are sharper than they ever were when I was a middle schooler. They get it. These things are not new to them. They see the stereotypes. They can name them. They understand that these dynamics are going on. And Mimi, I know you've done a lot of work with girls and obviously taught as well in the school, so your experience probably, I would imagine it might be similar. These are not foreign topics to them. And I think what's important, and this is a psychologist in me coming out, is the more that we can help students name dynamics, we can help them tame the impact. As a psychologist, and I work with clinical populations. That's what I spend a lot of time helping them do, is to give language and vocabulary for that knot in their stomach, the lump in their throat, the headache they get every time they walk into calculus, whatever it is. So it's helping people to put language around these experiences that they have anyway, so that it doesn't blindside them. So from my experience, these dynamics are relevant as well to middle school level and high school, of course.
And just to, deal with the entire gamut, Kathleen asked, how do you think these variables play out in graduate school?
Oh, my gosh. I'm actually doing this, even they're magnified because the stakes are higher, and that's why I made that comment, oh, my gosh. And they're higher because these are people who are now pre-professional, who've made another level of commitment, both in terms of time and training and finances, to now commit to this career. And the dynamics become more high stakes as well, because the intimate relationship and reliance on faculty is so much greater in terms of an advisor or mentor or dissertation chair, things like that. I am currently co-investigator on an NIH-funded grant that's a training program for underrepresented students pursuing PhDs in biological sciences and behavioral sciences. So we have 2 counseling psychologists, doctoral students, 10 students at a time. We've been doing this program for 3 years, and I developed the career and academic development component using the same construct that I presented to us today for that group. And these exact same factors are exactly what we're talking about. In fact, on April 5th, in a couple of weeks, I will be spending an hour and a half with them over lunch in cupcakes, which will hopefully make it easier to talk, cupcakes and tea, to discuss all of these cultural stereotypes and implicit bias, specifically in terms of how they're experiencing getting through the dissertation process, where so many more personality dynamics, implicit biases come through as they try to move through proposals. So I have found it absolutely relevant. I think the efficacy piece is just as critical. Their ability to be biculturally competent is even more exacerbated because the classes are smaller. You now have seminars that are full of 7 people or 8 people versus 70. And so those skills that we talked about in terms of that bicultural piece and the cultural variables are also relevant there too.
Well, Angela, this has been very, very interesting. I want to thank you very much for participating with us in this webinar, and also all of the participants who hung in there here to a little bit after the hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, good questions too, and I'm sorry that we weren't able to answer all of them, but let me say this, Angela's contact information is on the slide in front of you. Feel free, I assume, Angela, that they can contact you if they have any additional questions to ask specifically, and if there are any resources that you're interested in, she can also help you with that. And I want to, again, thank you, Angela, for doing this with us, and we hope that in 2012 we'll get you to our Professional Development Institute as one of our keynote speakers.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, it would be fun to have you there. So, but let me remind everyone that's on the call, the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equities Professional Development Institute is being held next month in Washington, D.C. from April 11th through the 14th. For more information about the conference itself, you can go to the NAPE website at napequity.org. We hope that many of you will join us there. We have a fantastic agenda planned, including a half-day seminar being conducted by Lise Elliott, neuroscientist, on her recently released book called Pink Brain, Blue Brain. And on that, I'm going to turn it back to Greg for his closing remarks and housekeeping items as we finish today's webinar.
Thank you for joining us today. Remember that this webinar will be available on the STEMequitypipeline.org website under the Professional Development header and then under STEM Equity Pipeline Archived Webinars in the next few days. For the live webinar, you'll be sent an email with a link to a survey that we would like for you to answer for us. For the archived webinar, please refer back to your registration email with the link and confirmation number to the survey. Thank you. This is the end of the webinar.
Angela? Thank you.